Well, it's great to be with you. I hope everyone can hear me okay. How's everybody doing? Good. Oh, come on. How's everybody doing? Good. Yeah, a little bit better. You've been in the studio, it's been a couple hours. So here's what I wanted to do tonight. I wanted to talk a little bit about user experience and do a little bit of storytelling. So I feel like we don't have a chance to do this enough in all the work that we're doing. But before getting there, I wanted to say I am honored to be here as a Kea Professor. It is fantastic to be back here at the school. I sat in this room, often in the back row, as a student, going through a tour of the world, looking at buildings, looking at projects done over the centuries as part of the architectural education that I had here. And it was transformational. It really opened my eyes to the world and really cemented in my mind the desire to be practicing on a global platform, and I'll talk a little bit about that today. So I wanted to also throw a recognition out to some folks that have meant a lot. My parents, who are here, they're not just seasoned students, but they were the impetus for me being here. They both are alums as well. And my family, Laurie, Alexa, Sari, for being here and being supportive as well. My wife is a Turk. We actually started dating here, and one day when I was working on a model, this is where you prove your relationship. It was the night before a jury, and I'm working on the model. I had an X-Acto knife in my hand, and you all know where this is going. It probably happened to all of you. And I sliced my finger right down the middle. And I looked at my fellow students and I said, I think I need to go to the hospital. And they said, well, we'll call your girlfriend because we can't take you right now. So she's not my wife. I made it back for the presentation, so all good. I also want to acknowledge JJ Rivers. Many of you know JJ. He was a student here a few years ago. He was in my class. The studio that I taught with David Cronrath on aging. And he's been a fantastic colleague at Gensler as well, and has been someone that wanted to be here today because he's been a part of some of the things that you'll see. So, what does this mean, design and user experience? So, it's about a journey, and every project has a journey. And the smart architects are the ones that recognize that opportunity and recognize that there is a moment to take themselves, their colleagues, and their client on a journey. And I put up this diagram for two reasons. One is a personal journey, and also through the storytelling of several projects that I'll show you this evening, the journeys that we've gone on with colleagues and clients around the world. So for me, how did it start? So it started here. I've known I wanted to be an architect since I was 5, but it really wasn't, in a sense, I would say, transformed until I was here. And I went here, sat in this room, as I mentioned, worked in the studio, didn't pull an all-nighter, but pulled many late nights, and worked hard to kind of understand what it meant to be an architect in this day and age. That led me to the University of Pennsylvania, where I did my graduate studies, and led me directly to Gensler. So I joined in 1996, so it's been 19 years. I joined as I think they called it back then a CAD monkey. That's literally what my title was, draftsman, or whatever that was in that day and age. But it was a fantastic time to join the profession because I really had played a lot with both kind of the physical craft, model making and studying through sketching, but also the digital craft. And I got into the profession at a time where all these firms had invested in digital technology, but they didn't know what to do with it. So I got into Gensler at a time when they had literally computers at every desk, and they had invested in all the software, but they had no idea what to do with it. So it was a good time to come in and be a voice. But really what was transformational for me were 3 trips that happened in relatively rapid succession that started here. So how many of you have done the Italy program? Okay, how many of you are going to do the Italy program? That should be a balance of the hands, right? So I did the Italy program, as Brian mentioned, and that was really my first time traveling outside and across the pond, outside the US, dramatically and across the pond. And it was a true eye-opener. But I found that when I was there, what really captivated me was looking at how people were interacting with places and spaces. And how transformational architecture over the era had been able to affect the city and the community. And then I went to Penn, and one of the reasons I went there was because I really wanted to sample the East. I had sampled the West, so I wanted to go East. And they had a Japan program. So I went to Japan and studied with a Japanese master who basically was applying traditional craft to modern architecture, which was fascinating. And then I came back to Philadelphia, and I was so disoriented by what I had just experienced that I started work at a firm as an intern, making models, wearing headphones, kind of just focused on what I was doing, when one day the guy that was running the firm walks in and said, "We just got this Getty grant to go to Zuni, the tribe, and live on the reservation and work with the tribe and document their village and their pueblo in a way that their future generations can understand it. But we need someone that can make models. Anyone want to go?" And I'm like, "I'll go." So I went over to Zuni and spent time on the reservation. And to show you how kind of culturally adapted I was at the moment, I arrived there, and the guy that met me said, "You're just in time for the dancing." I'm like, "Well, I don't dance." And he said, "No, it's been a drought." And it was the rain dancing. So we went, and we're sitting there, and the Zuni, for those of you that don't know, it's a closed reservation. You can't just go in there and see this. So basically, I was kind of adopted by the community, and I was sitting there watching rain dance, and I'm like, "Well, this is architecture, this is awesome." So the question I ask all of you, and it's something I ask myself every day, is who are we designing for? Who's your audience? Every single project that we do around the world, we ask this question. And it's an important question, because we're not designing for ourselves. There's a client, they have an issue, or many. They have a program, sometimes they don't. And they have a desire to have something transformed. And we are the catalysts of that. We're the conductors of that symphony. So not only who we're designing for, but what's the story? Every project has a story. And our job, and I believe this through, all the way through, is to figure out what's that story and be able to be the good communicators and tell that story on our project. So tonight, what I wanted to do is tell you a few stories. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Duke, which is very hard for me to do. Bring to Nada, which doesn't mean anything yet, but hopefully will when I'm done. A project in Tyson's. The Olympic bid that we did for Washington. The Yards, which is one of the sites for those that are in the studio, along with me and others. Our office, and that little weekend house that Brian mentioned. So, I'm going to take you first to Duke Quinshan University. So, what is the user experience here? Well, the user experience here is really developing a campus community where there was none and making an experience from scratch. So, how did it start? And I was in China a week ago, and 2 weeks ago, and this is a shot from the campus. So it's a project I started in July 2009. The first phase is done. There's students there, there's faculty there, there's administrators there. It's wild to see this. But how did it start? So what is this? This is a user experience map. And for those of you familiar with this, it may make some sense, but for those that aren't, I'm going to explain what it is. I'm a big believer that what makes design exciting is getting a bunch of people around the table that are from different backgrounds, that their input on projects, together with your own, creates rich and dynamic solutions. So at the time that we started this relationship with Duke, we had a cultural anthropologist in the office, along with architects and designers. And we had a call, which is I would call a cold call, about an RFP, request for proposal, for Duke University to do a feasibility study on their campus in Durham, which for a building, an old real estate building attached to their business school. And there was incumbent firms going after it, but they somehow wanted us to try it too. So it was a cold call scenario, and I'm feeling like, wow, we should go after this. I think it could be an amazing opportunity. It was the beginning of market volatility. And I said, well, if we're going to do this, we got to do it in a way that differentiates us from all the people that have worked at Duke that they're going to know. So we had a chance to tour, all these projects, when these come up, they say, you want to tour the site? Sure, we want to tour the site. So we sent someone down there to tour the site, but I also sent down a cultural anthropologist. And I said, when you're down there, I want you to plant yourself in the existing building and look for all the problem areas. Listen, look, observe, take pictures, document, and come back and let's map this. So we walked into the interview and we rolled out a 6-foot-long map, which is this. And it goes area by area. And it notes all the kind of pain points of the building. Wayfinding, natural light, smells moldy, on and on. And then we circled in green, or highlighted in green, where the key areas of focus are. And we said to them, look, you don't know us, but this is how we work. We work collaboratively with you, and we're going to identify the kind of pain points in your building. And in our minds, you don't need to go ahead and spend beyond your budget to transform the whole building. You have to affect these areas at a minimum. So they love the way we work, and we won the job. So when we won the job, we said, well, who's your audience? And they couldn't figure that out. So what do we do in these scenarios? We figure out the profiles of the people that would potentially be the users in the space. So at the bottom are examples of people that we made up based on the research that we did of who the potential users would be for this campus. I'm sorry, for the Durham campus, right? And so we formed this great relationship, did this amazing feasibility study, built a great relationship with these folks, delivered the project, and then what happened? The economy went off the cliff. And the project went on the proverbial shelf, and there was nothing. I'm like, oh my God. We just formed this great relationship with them, and we got nothing for it. And this is really hard because just working with them was tough for me as a Terp. Because when we were in the ACC, before the world of the Big Ten, I used to sit in Cole Fieldhouse and hold up a banner that said I puked for duty. So here I am trying to form a relationship with them. And I hope we're not recording this, by the way. We're recording this. Do not play this outside of this school. Thank you. I love to. Okay. So what happened? I contacted the associate dean who I developed a friendship with. I said, look, I think I connected well with the dean of the school, and I hate to lose this relationship. And some of you have heard me talk a little bit about this, but this is the first time I can talk about it with a completed project now behind us. And I said, how do I connect with the dean? She said, well, he's really hard. He only reads emails if they're 5 words or less. And I'm like, oh my God. So I sent him an email, and I said, great project, what's next? Right? So then he says, global vision. 2 words. I'm like, I got nothing on this, okay? So I said, great, where? This is a night. I'm thinking, well, how do I get 5 words when I get less? And he goes, India. Ever been? And I respond back, no. How did you go? Still on the report. So 2 weeks later, I'm in New Delhi. And I'm looking at a site on behalf of Duke University, and I'm walking around this empty land in the middle of New Delhi, planning out a building for them. And I love this, right? This is back to when I was sitting in a piazza in Rome, looking at how people interact with places and spaces. So that's what I was doing. Great. So at the same time I was over there, I had a team back in DC researching everything we could about doing work in New Delhi. What are the construction technologies they're good with? You know, who would our users be on this campus? Who would be the right people to bring in as consultants? What are the kind of natural philosophy, natural traditions that want to play? Anything. We went through all this stuff. We designed a great building. I'm not going to show it to you because it ended up on the shelf. And I'm like, oh my God. So basically they didn't have the funding over there to do it. So I'm like, another one, man. We're 2 for 2 on this one. So I sent back a note to the dean, my buddy, and I said, India, great. What next? So he said, China. Ever been? I said, no, happy to go. A month later, I'm in Shanghai on behalf of Duke University. And I start having the same kind of conversations I had with the Indian representatives, and I realized that all of a sudden something is very different. And I had a translator, I'd never been to China before, and it's rapid fire, and I hear blah, 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 200, blah, 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 50, and I lean over to the translator, and I said, what are they saying? And she said, they want you to do a campus. They're giving you 200 acres, they want 50 buildings, and they would like it built over the next couple of years. And I said, after that meeting, I went, emailed back to Duke. I said, I think we have something bigger to deal with. So outside of Shanghai, 37 miles away, is a town called Qinshan. And the Qinshan government really wanted to change kind of the profile of that area and become known as an education and technology zone rather than the factory zone that they were known for. So what is this area? Well, when you go and explore it, it's actually quite beautiful. It's like a Venice of the East. And for those of you that are familiar with Suzhou, you know that it's kind of like the water towns of China. So that's what you see on the left, where the street is the canal. And in many of these towns, this is still how business is conducted. And beautiful architecture, beautiful local inspiration. So, long and short of that, realize that this is a tremendous opportunity to design a campus from scratch. And as you guys know, living on a campus here, how often does that happen? Like hardly ever, right? It's mostly additive. The donor has money, there's a site, they want to put up a building, they go out and they do some additional fundraising, they get the building's there. And it's added to a fabric of an existing campus. But this is a campus opportunity from scratch. So what does that mean? What does it want to be? So it was an amazing experience. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the campus. But as an architect, so this is July 2009, and I want to do this, obviously great project. So I figured I have to negotiate a contract. And Duke said, great, you can do this part of the contract with us, and the rest you have to negotiate yourself with the Chinese government. So I get back on a plane and I go back over there to negotiate this contract. And I had a crash course in doing business over there, which is basically, we spent the whole day talking about the contract, and when it got to the price, they said, we're going to break a good dinner. I'm like, well, we're going to finish up. And they're like, no, we'll talk about it at dinner. So I go to dinner, and I sit down at dinner, and I notice there are these bottles. I notice these glasses. And I'm not a big drinker. And then I realized what was about to happen, which was they wanted to have a good dinner, have a lot of drinks, and then talk about the price. So anyways, I had a translator next to me, and I had the governor or whatever of that district sitting next to me on this side, and we go through this whole thing, and drink blah, 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 and we had put in, just so you know, from the business side, as Brian mentioned, very important, we had put in a contract for $2.4 million to do all these buildings, all this master planning, all this work, and translator leans over to me after he says his spiel, and says they're excited, they would love you to do the project, they want you to do everything you promised for $900,000. And they're expecting me to say okay, but I'm not there yet. So I said, look, we'll redefine the scope and we'll do it. So we managed to do it. And what we had is we did a master plan for 200 acres, which is what you see on the left, for 50 buildings plus. And the first phase, which is what you see on the right, which is built now. And I'm going to walk you through it. But I want to say one last thing, because every project, when you have these journeys, there's always these hiccups. So my hiccup on this particular one, the first things weren't really hiccups, they were just little interesting moments, was a phone call I got one day when we're literally starting the master planning work, and they say, it's a Duke on the other line, and the representative from Duke says, we have a problem. It's because the Chinese government's involved in this project, they have to compete it. So you're going to have to compete against other firms from around the world. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so much. I'm like, I see like the third thing on the shelf in my mind. And I said, we can't do this. I said, heck, I got an idea. We have an office in Shanghai, and you've got the DC team. Call them back and tell them we're going to run a competition between the Gensler Shanghai office and the Gensler DC office, and I'll be the intermediary between. And he's like, give it a try. So he calls him up and has this conversation, calls him back the next morning, and he says, okay, yeah, good, they're good with it. I'm like, all right, so you win, right? So anyways, to walk you through this, here's the important thing about this one. The campuses we know, you walk out right here and you see it, you got a quad, right? And there's a big green space, and in the US, students gather in a quad. It's different over there. And we had to understand the user experience in China. Okay? So one of the things we recognize is there's appreciation for landscape and being a part of the landscape. So the buildings and the landscape needed to work together. And the other thing is, Duke had this mantra, which I think is very, very good, which is it's very sound, which is learning can happen anywhere. So we needed to create a campus where the indoor spaces, the outdoor spaces, the indoor rooms, the outdoor rooms had all worked together to allow learning to happen anywhere. So what did we do? Well, the water table was basically a meter below the ground. So we pulled it up. We basically said, we're going to create a water quad. So all the water that you see in the middle is going to be kind of our take on a quad. And these buildings will be like puzzle pieces that work their way around the quad with bridges that connect them. And then you'll have these landscape moments around the buildings that create an extension of the indoor spaces outdoors. So inside out. And you create these learning moments around this beautiful scenery. There's an academic building, building number 1. Building number 2, a hotel and conference center. Building number 3, a lab and science-oriented building. 4, a faculty residence. Building 5, a 200-bed dormitory. Building 6, an administration and a service building. And they're all having this kind of axial relationship. So as a user at a campus, where normally your campus experiences in China, they're a little bit more scattered and more chaotic, connected to buildings, is very much subconscious wayfinding. I could be in the atrium of one building and look across and see another. I can move from one space to the other. I have this amazing experience as I go, connecting with the landscape, but I'm not having to zig and zag all the way through to get from one place to the other. And at the same time, and by the way, you'll see how we've been diagramming throughout these stories, be able to tell a story when language is a barrier, right? So how do diagrams, which we all do, right, every day, how do we make them as powerful and impactful as possible to communicate, in this case, a user experience both in plan, but also from the sustainability side that could basically bridge the cultures. So on the left is an inspiration image for the project, and that's a Chinese, in a sense, neighborhood. It's quite inspirational around the water. And to the right is a shot of the campus, one of the shots. And really kind of pulling through east meets west ideas. This is a shot of the academic building that basically has a curved facade gesturing to the landscape in front of an infinity pool. And to get into this building, you cross the infinity pool. And it's that idea of bridging across, entering up through a portal into something that changes your kind of orientation and opens you up to new experiences. And the use of glass at key moments in this building was about, in a sense, being more transparent, being more open, connecting the East, connecting the West, and having a learning scenario that bridges a top-tier university like Duke with the educational opportunities in China. And this is a shot of that building. We haven't had professional photography. This is the client walking with me a couple weeks ago with their iPhone, by the way. So I'm like, damn good for the iPhone. So what you're seeing here is a curved glass and a roof that has straight with a slight kind of kick at the end that has kind of connects to a lot of the profiles that you see when you go through the old Hutong neighborhoods in China. This is in the middle of that plan. There was this water building. It's a building that really floats on the water. It's a glass box that then has a roof that has kind of an undulation to it that picks up on the profiles of traditional Chinese architecture. And this is a shot of that building. This is a shot looking across. And one of the things that I think was exciting to see when I was over there was people going across and interacting with each other on these bridges and connecting in on these spaces. Shot. And then also introducing a level of craft that prior to this has really not been in Chinese educational institutional buildings. So right now, what's beautiful to see now and exciting for me as the architect of the project to go back over there and talk to the people that are users of that building, and there's a pride of place. Because a lot of them have worked or been through other Chinese institutions, and this is such an upgraded experience for them that that pride of place translates to a joy of being there. To the left is a shot inside of this interior street that moves through, and to the right is this larger living room space that connects the floor and kind of creates a vertical integrated campus experience. And as I move to the next project, I wanted to share with this, one of the things I love is to see how people interpret your campus or your design or your project after you've done it. And in this case, there are school children that come through and use the campus in different ways, and they were asked to paint things that were memorable from the campus to them. So this is their diagrams of our project. So I'm going to take you from China to Venezuela. And prior to this, I had never done a baseball stadium. I'd never done any kind of stadium. And this is a 36,000 seat baseball stadium that's under construction. That will be the National Stadium of Venezuela. And this is done out of our office here. And from a user experience standpoint and the storytelling moment, one of the things we found in our research is that baseball is a religion in Venezuela. Okay? So I'm going to show you a very short little video, if it works, about us understanding that experience and communicating back to them that, yeah, we get you. We understand what's important to you.
Más importante de Venezuela. Es su regalo de mujer, es su historia de sueños construidos desde orígenes humildes. Cabrera, Santana, Ordóñez, el rey Félix, ellos empezaron en los campos de Caracas, Maracay, Valencia, con poco aparte de su talento, determinación y esperanza. A través de su perseverancia y del apoyo de sus familias y comunidades, ellos dieron el paso adelante para tomar papeles protagonistas en los grandes escenarios deportivos del mundo. Ahora, los aplausos del mundo van dirigidos a Venezuela y a su pueblo. Un guante de oro, un título de jonrones, un campeonato tras otro.
So that's the voice of one of the guys in my office. That was not my voice.
But that's singing of the American baseball is not.
Certainly not the other night, right? So we put this together. Our belief is you use every tool in the toolbox to be able to communicate that you understand and are creating a user experience platform for this client. Especially, again, from China where there's a language barrier to here where there's a language barrier as well. So I wanted to do a brief walkthrough of this because this is a project of a very different sort. And you got to get your hands around it in a way that we can still craft architecture and tell that story. So, as I mentioned, baseball is a religion there. It is integral to the country. It is on the minds of the people in a way that's very different than sport is here. And the game-day experience there is huge. It's all about being a part of a community. So in a sense, our stadium is a community center, okay? So this is a diagram, and one of the things that I really felt was important with our team on this one is that this stadium and this site, A, you have to make it comfortable because the climate is pretty darn warm, right? B, you have to create a sense of people being together. So unlike a lot of stadiums that you see in the US where they spread the seats around and they create different tiers where there's club and there's suites and there's, you know, the nosebleed, and then there's the really good seats at the bottom. We wanted to create something that's a little bit more universal. The other thing is, this is being built on the top of a mountain. So that's your view on the left. So everyone should have that view, right? So that means that the outfield is going to not have a building in it, right? So the other thing is, back to the comfort of having all these people together, you need to be able to have a canopy. So we designed the world's largest baseball stadium canopy for maximum comfort and shade, which is why the truss would be the equivalent of a 5-story building. So this is the stadium, and you can see the bowl, as it works its way kind of around the mountain base and opens it up as a kind of open arms to the larger cityscape beyond. But it also wanted to be able to tell a story about the colors, the patterns of Venezuela, and in a sense connect into the culture. So one of the things that was really inspirational was when you look at the craft that is evident in everyday culture, the weave. So we took the weave, and what you see over there is a steel weave that wraps itself around the upper bowl of the stadium and creates a really kind of intricate level of detail, but it's actually really nice. It takes what is frankly utilitarian in so many American stadiums and takes it to a level of, hopefully, we see it, but hopefully you do too, it's art in their stadiums. And the other is the walls of the stadium. We're like, why not make them of the earth? So we're using rammed earth technology to take the soil of the ground there and make it into the walls that envelop the larger, in a sense, surround of the stadium. And then the beauty of having all that different talent around us in the office is being able to weave in a brand strategy platform that works and creates districts in the stadium. So when you get your ticket, there's a pattern on that ticket, which is then corresponding back to kind of super graphics and color coding in the stadium. And that weaves its way through, so there's districts in the stadium. You think about it, that video that you saw where everyone's kind of cheering passionately, imagine going day after day of games. This is your family, right? You want to be with your tribe. So when you're with that kind of group, you have a district. So there's a way to identify, and it's a way to use architecture as a canvas to tell that larger story and to celebrate their heroes. The people that are their celebrities are these heroes in baseball. So we worked in a way to tell that story through the architecture. And again, this gets back to being able to take that journey from point A to point B. We don't want it to basically be something that, we just say, okay, well, find a consultant down there that can do signage and wayfinding. Let's make it integral to the architecture, and let's take the talent that we have and come up with an approach. Okay, so we went to Venezuela, now coming back to Tyson's Corner, Virginia. Definitely still a different language spoken there, but we'll kind of focus it in a little bit. Tyson's Corner, this is the project that we recently completed. Something that was kind of near and dear to my heart. This is a shot of the lobby, and one of the challenges in Tyson's, what's been their big transformation? Metro, right, they got Metro. So with Metro, that means that, and Metro is above ground, it means that you have to consider how mass transit works and how people move through a community that already had kind of, frankly, a relatively disoriented urban fabric to it, or maybe it's a suburban fabric, depending how you look at it. So I wanted to walk you through our strategy, because this was a design competition by this client where they picked 5 firms to compete against each other. And my favorite type of competition, the unpaid competition, which frankly, I was out on a limb on this one because it was in the height of the recession, and I said, we got to go after this one. This is great, it's a good opportunity, and we're going to spend a lot, and it's high risk to do it, but the reward could be great. It could be a gateway building for the Tyson's community. So we went after it, and we won it. The winning strategy for us was looking at that user experience and telling a story from the inside out. What would it mean to be somebody in this building, working there? How would you get here? If you take Metro, what's your way in? If you take a car and drive, which is the normal way of going around Tyson's, how do you get in here? So what you see is the massing the client gave us in the top right, which was kind of basically filling the vessel, filling the site. What you see in the middle is if you were just to say, I'm going to make an efficient office building, put a center core in there and put equal space around it, I get a box. What we said is, let's take that site and dissect it and create 2 very efficient plannable bars so that if I'm a tenant and my business is growing, that I have both integral in the structure and integral in the space, the ability to change my space around as my company changes. So if I'm a tech company and I'm growing, I can move and configure without columns being in the way, and I can puncture vertically and connect and not destroy the structural integrity of the building. And then from the skins, how can we use skin to tell a story about an opportunity in Tyson's to present a new take on the architectural context? If you stand in a tall building over there now and look out at Tyson's, or I should say when we started this building, what you saw was a lot of buildings that were what I would call kind of B, C quality buildings. They were ugly. They had, very few of them had any kind of presence on a national stage. And they had a mix of materials that frankly created a context that was a pretty depressing context. This was going to be the first building out of the gate. How do we use skin in a way to put our moment in the skyline that is a little bit more timeless, that represents Tyson's future, not Tyson's past. That recognizes the urbanity of being able to connect in with mass transit. And that also breaks the scale of this down in a way that allows it to be that kind of gateway building propped out on the beltways. So what you see here is an attempt to use a device, a space, as a way to bring people together. The diagram you see on the right is all the different ways to kind of connect in on this building, right? So the red at the top left is metro. So metro is elevated. So you come across a bridge from the station into this development, and you're not actually changing planes. You're walking right into the building, okay? At the same time, there's another plane, which is a ground plane, current ground plane, ground level, where you have a vehicular drop-off and a pedestrian experience at that level. So how do you unite these? So what we said is let's embrace the idea that there really is two ground planes at Tyson. There's the ground plane we know, and the new ground plane vis-a-vis all the elevated tracks and all the elevated stations that are going in there. So let's kind of be the first out of the gate to say that we can bring people together and let that lobby be that mixing bowl, that even though you're coming in at two different elevations, that we can find a way to bring you in and reorient you, that each space, each spatial experience can be built, can be grand, but your way of accessing the building is, in a sense, common. So what you see here is a 55-foot by 110-foot cable net glass wall. So it is a very minimalist approach to a glass wall, and it creates more of an ephemeral boundary between that drop-off area up and below and that lobby space. Where you come into the space, if you're dropped off, and you go up to the main level, to the plaza level, that plaza level then connects right into the mall. They built a whole giant platform, which is an elevated programmed outdoor plaza with landscape, softscape, hardscape, that goes right into the mall, and they made it connect to the mall. So now we're embracing that with this lobby. And what's awesome is you go in this finished product now and you walk through it, and the spatial experience is great. People walk in, they're not disoriented, they can get around. They've embraced the metro, they've embraced the fact that Tyson still has cars, and they've been able to lease this building up in a way that actually became an amazing national story, where it was 80% leased before it was finished construction, which is pretty rare in these days. And for those of you that know Intelsat headquarters that used to be in Northwest Washington, in a pretty interesting complex, this is Intelsat's headquarters now. With a lobby that really opens itself up to the outdoors through this experience of the glass wall, that has a mix of raw and refined materials that, in a sense, express themselves as they are, but work together as a whole. And a skin story that is experienced both at the ground level and also up at the top. And then as you approach from the north, which is my side, I'm up in Maryland, so as I drive south and going across, what do I see? Well, instead of that fabric that I mentioned earlier, you see a building that is trying to express a new direction for Tyson's. So, as architects and designers, if you move from that scale, and obviously I'm bouncing around in scales, but that's the beauty of what I enjoy doing every day. I wanted to walk you through this one, because not all of it's public, but it was an amazing ride. So I grew up in DC, in this area. I used to go to Redskin games with my grandfather on Sundays when they used to win. And I used to pull into the parking lot with him at RFK Stadium, and I would look across the river and I'd say, "What's over there?" And he'd say, "We don't know. We don't really go over there." Well, as I grew up, I kind of realized that Washington sees itself as a one-river town. The Potomac River really defines Washington. It's the front door. It's the iconic architecture we know. It's the landscape we see. When people come from around the world, they experience the Potomac River, the National Mall, in some way, shape, or form, and all of the architecture associated with it. Well, there's a back door to Washington, and Ward 7 and Ward 8 are part of that back door. So we had an opportunity. A couple of years ago, we got a phone call and said, "Would you like to join an effort to bring the Olympics to Washington, D.C.?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "That would be awesome." And I said, "But the bigger opportunity, I think, is to think about what does Washington want to be, and how do you, in 2050, how do you work your way backwards and allow the Olympics to be a catalyst to a broader master plan realization for the city? So I wanted to walk you through some of the images and diagrams that represented the bid, because what I can tell you is while we aren't going to be having the Olympics in 2024 here, that I do think that this is the canvas and the platform that if there ever are Olympics in DC, this will be the blueprint for how it's done. And I also should tell you, I told you some stories that we've been going about going after projects and the risk and the reward. As an architect out there in this day and age, I believe you have to take risks. And that opportunity to do those user experiences and tell those stories comes from taking calculated risks. This is a big risk. You know, we weren't necessarily guaranteed anything out of this one. But with all these risks come opportunities. In the case of Tyson's, it's a built building. In the case of this, it's an opportunity to connect in with the community and have a level of conversation that has never happened before in this community between government leaders, private sector businesses, and the community, and a pool of architects and designers that would never have normally had a robust conversation. What you see is an image of the RFK parking lot, for those of you who've been there. Transformed as a park that connects to the Anacostia, that reimagines the Anacostia River as a place that people can be walking along. Bridges that connect across into Ward 7 and Ward 8. And I'll let you read this while I talk a little bit about the opportunity. So if we think about the city as a canvas for something different, in this case, the Olympic Games, how do you use the spaces and places that we all know so well to tell a story about this city? And this Mandela quote, I think, is a fantastic and inspirational quote about the power of sport to unite. And if architecture can be a good portion of that, then all for it. So what you see here is the core venue plan. And we set up a strategy and said, okay, what if everybody was to play along? What if the National Park Service was to say, and the Secretary of the Interior, go ahead, use the mall. Use that land around the Lincoln Memorial. Use all these iconic architecture moments on National Park Service land to create a games. Business communities were saying, you know what, take my land and let me be a part of the story. Communities were jumping aboard saying, let's create a compact games. So the games that you see here are these venue moments that everything is within 70% of the games is within a 7-kilometer walkable distance. Okay, what does that mean? So we compared it. So there's our vision where the bulk of the games is, right? This is the Rio games that are about to happen in 2016, right? So you see a spread scenario. What happens with the spread scenario? You have the transportation issues, you have traffic, you have venues that are spread, and the ability of staffing those venues to be a challenge, money, on and on. Bottom left, London. So if you think of London, London was billed as the most compact games in history. This would have been even tighter. From a user experience standpoint, imagine walking on the mall and being able to say, you know what, I want to go over and see, I want to see beach volleyball. I want to go see rowing. And all those things are kind of accessible to you around the mall. But when you think about that, and you start thinking about that story, well, you don't want any white elephants. What I mean by white elephants, if you think of Greece, the games, right? A lot of those buildings are sitting there rotting. In fact, Beijing had that same problem. I've been over there and looked at a lot of them, and they were trying to get new life on them. So Winter Olympics definitely helps. They get snow, but that's another story. But they have a problem with these white elephants. So how do we do this in a way where we don't have white elephants? How do we look at the legacy mode for these areas, work our way backwards into a games mode, and look at the existing conditions and see what needs to be transformed? So some of these diagrams do that. But then we also said, why not have some of these moments as inspirational? And JJ and I have a colleague, this woman named Maddie, who is in our marketing team, and turns out she's an Olympian. She's the 6th best swimmer from in her sport from the Sydney Games. She came in one day and we're having this planning session. She walks in and she says, look, I just want to tell you, as an athlete, when I was competing and I was getting ready to go to my event, I got in the boat from the Olympic Village, and the boat was going to take me over to my venue. And I was focused on what I was doing, and halfway across that boat ride, I looked up and I saw the Sydney Opera House. And it was in that moment that I had the chills, and I had that impact that I am here, this is my moment, and I will forever remember what I'm about to do. So how do you do that in our neck of the woods? Well, we said, why not have these events? To the right is beach volleyball in West Potomac Park. So you're in the shadows of the Lincoln Memorial for that, for field hockey, for all these events that are in and around the National Mall. We even got the Park Service to say, archery across the reflecting pool is an interesting idea. So this is the DC that you know, with the games dropped in. And it doesn't change the city so much, but it starts to affect areas that are, in a sense, sacred spaces, right? And it also brings together an amazing opportunity to tell a story of the canvas of our city in a different way. It's not the politics, it's not the red versus the blue. It's actually a united Washington around a central games that connects in and around all these areas that you previously associated DC for in a different light. So I contacted, when we're doing this, I contacted some friends of mine in China that work for a rendering company that actually did the Beijing 2008 games. And how many of you watched the opening ceremonies? Do you remember there was this awesome fireworks in the stadium, and then they panned out and you saw all the fireworks going down the river? There's no river. It was CG. These guys did it. And they looped it in with the broadcast feed. So I'm like, these are my guys. So this is the clusters. This is 70% of the games are in and around the ball, right? You animate the edge of the Potomac River, you animate the edge of the Anacostia River, and you tell a new story about the brand of Washington, D.C. In a different light. You take the hill east, and you connect over to Ward 7 and Ward 8. You animate the east and west bank of the Anacostia River, and then you leave a legacy. And the shocking thing for me, by the way, is you learn things about the community. How many professional standard, professional quality track and field venues do you think there are east of the Mississippi that meet the international standard?
Yeah. Zero.
Yes, 0. I was leading up to 0, right? So yeah, there's 0. So we talked about maybe on Pop the Point that you have a track and field venue that is a legacy that you leave back to Ward 7 and Ward 8, to the colleges, even to national interest. Why not, if there's a Penn Relays, why not a DC national relay? And the amazing thing is all the schools said, yeah, we're on board, we're interested, talk to us more about this. So we didn't get the bid, right? And the amazing thing was, I remember the day of the pitch. It was, there were 2 pitches, but the one I was in was kind of the first one. And it was fantastic. So I went in and I told a story about growing up in DC and about this canvas and about this ability to have our city, a world city, the only world capital to, in the sense that's of the kind of power capitals to not host the games, to have an opportunity to transform our city towards a larger master plan. And the amazing thing is we emerged out of that pitch in the lead. And then the politics entered the picture with the concern that the international perception of Washington would be one of all of politicians, and that's it, that's the city. And that the politicians that can't get anything done. That's why there are no Olympics in 2024 here. So hopefully we can transform the brand of DC in other ways. Ironically, tomorrow I'm having lunch with representatives from the US government that love this plan and would like to see the land and the facilities in and around the city utilized in ways that better the community. So a couple more to share with you before we close. I wanted to walk you through this because we were able to implement some of this. So this is the yards. How many of you know the yards now, right? Some of you in the studio should know it because this is one of the sites. So these are 2 buildings. This is not the finished product, thank you. But this is a building to the left and a building to the right. In World War I and World War II, the Navy Yard expanded, and because of production for war, and ships were built here. right? This is the Boilermaker shop on the left. This is the lumber shed on the right, where lumber for ships was dried out, 1918, 1919. So they're historic, they're a national landmark, and we basically had an opportunity to reposition these buildings. So that's the Boilermaker building now, and it was an amazing opportunity to, from a user experience standpoint, to tell a story about two buildings that are relatively small, that will be the first out of the gate to help signal a new community. And being able to use historic preservation, adaptive reuse, and placemaking as tools in the toolbox to craft better space, new use. And right now, if you've been down here on Blue Jacket Brewery, and we took what is one big space, put office on the upstairs level and made retail facing out to a plaza on the south, and it's one of the hottest places right now in this ballpark district. This is one of the restaurants that's kind of inline that opens up to the street, and it's fantastic. And you have these, in DC, you don't have much kind of industrial architecture that's indigenous to our city. You know, it's not just kind of not, you go up to Baltimore, you got plenty of it. And being able to take this building and respect the historic character, but introduce a modern vocabulary that comes in and creates entry, creates spaces, outdoor and indoor, that are inviting, that are welcoming to the community, and that make these two buildings significant again. So the Lumbershed building is right there. And this is on any given warm day, you go down there, and this place is amazingly active. For those that are in the studio, the site that we're talking about called P2B is right on the other side of that, right? And what we did for this building is said, let's respect the architectural character that's already there and showcase it. In a sense, create a jewel box, a scenario where we're wrapping that architecture. You still see it, you preserve it, and you create multiple uses out of a building that was a singular use. But you use the architectural materials in a way that tells that story and kind of brings the outside in. The center hall was always open. There was train tracks that used to go through there and drop off the lumber. So we used the point-supported glass system to kind of loft, give that feeling of openness, and then respect to the trusses, preserve that, let that portal in, and then did these bridges across that allow you to bridge the east and west wing. For the architecture of the skin on the wings themselves, using the brise-soleil where the slab edge is to make the feeling of the slab edges kind of popping out. And then basically having a transparent building that speaks about what's going on inside of it to everybody that's outside. It communicates. And then being able to do a level of detail and craft for a building that is very much experienced at that human scale. This is in a tower, this is 2 stories, both buildings in a sense, and there's a touch, feel kind of scenario that as architects we have to respect. So to our own space, and some of you had a chance to visit this, so there's no tougher client, well there's one tougher client, I'll get to them last. There's no tougher client than all your colleagues. And architects are an opinionated bunch. You probably know that, right? Everyone in my office was my client on this one. And we wanted to create a new space that transformed the design shop and literally brought it down to the street, broadcast what we do to the everyday passerby, and said, all right, let's put design on display. So a lot of times you go into an architect shop and there's a reception area, there's some conference rooms, and what's happening in the design process is a mystery unless it's communicated through the course of a presentation. So in our case, you walk into the space, everything's on display from the second you walk in. And the space itself is very raw. So we took 2 restaurants out, we stripped off the facade, and we created a space that is studio space, that is gathering space, and then blasted 2 holes in the building and connected up. So I call this a hackable building because we really hacked the heck out of this thing to make it our own and create a vertically integrated campus. And why I say campus? Because I really believe our office should be a learning environment, that we're all learning from each other every day, we should be constantly having moments to interact and not be so heads down that we miss the opportunities to learn from each other. So this is a shot through our space. You see the 2 days that we took out. You see the stairs that connect. You have team areas on the right, the area that the studio was in the other day that opens up and really becomes a kind of a giant multi-purpose space and creates an environment where really it's a special place to be. But I also wanted to really bring back the making and craft of architecture. Because as a profession, I think we kind of start to gravitate too much to renderings and to being able to produce polished presentation. And it almost feels kind of foreign to pull a trace paper sketch into a presentation, right? What about a model? A lot of firms have kind of gravitated towards the out-of-house scenario where models are made in a shop in China, in Asia, other places in Asia, or in our case in LA, we're often using a shop. So at the back of this, we created, you can see the kind of colored glass in the back, it's a fabrication lab where anybody can go in and everybody can go in and tinker. You have an idea about something, go make it, right? And studios and team spaces create the opportunity to interact with one another on a regular basis. And for me, the dynamism in an open architecture office is something that I think I've been fascinated with my whole career, and even before that in school when we visited firms. I remember visiting what was now a current competitor when I was in school, and they had people kind of in corners, and they were communicating with each other, and they were making models, and one hand didn't know what the other hand was doing. And I was like, man, we can't ever do that. So, our library is a place that people come together. There's constant innovation of materials being put on display. And that Fab Lab that I mentioned earlier is a place where not only are you in there tinkering, but people see you in there tinkering. And it creates this iterative dialogue, which I think is really wonderful about that idea of making. And you know what? It's never fully baked. And it doesn't have to always be fully baked. That whole idea that people can continue to contribute. So I did want to take you to my toughest client. And I introduced you to my clients earlier that are sitting in the front row. And I wanted to close with this project that Brian mentioned. So this is my house that we built. And why did we build this house? Well, we live in a cottage house, small cottage house in Bethesda. And we've added on to it a little bit over time. We love the neighborhood, we love the community. But when we said we wanted to build a new modern house, Peter knows this well, working in these areas and doing modern houses, it is hard, one, to find the right sites to do it on, the zoning constraints, the challenges, the community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and the prices to get in and do these pieces of land. So in our case, we looked, and there were bidding wars everywhere, and we said, screw it, it's not us. We're not going to do this. We're going to stay in our house, and we're going to go buy farmland out about an hour and 15 outside the city, and we're going to where the zoning constraint is, please be 50 feet back from your property line. That's it. Folks, that's it. And create a place that we want to be. So we had to start. So I'm a big believer also in engaging your clients in the process. So I mentioned I wanted to be an architect since I was 5, and I started with Legos. So I worked with one of my clients. Raise your hand for this client. You raise it higher. There you go. And we created a model of what we were trying to build. And I went out with my other clients to the site, and we walked out and figured out where we wanted to situate this building. And this building is really, when you're doing something that's more personal like this, the user experience, in a sense, crosses and becomes a little bit of your own. And in my case, growing up, my parents, for years, we'd go up to a place in Western Pennsylvania, which is our little getaway place. And it's a small condo, but it is one room with a couple little bedrooms off of it, the one room where everybody hangs out. So from a planning standpoint, we wanted to have something similar. So the main level, you come in, and what you see is what you get. You have a house with a main room, a great room, that everybody can gather in, bedrooms that are off of it, to the bottom left and the top right. And then with the extrusion of the form, you have this western-facing porch that allows you to capture the sunset both from within the room and also from the porch. And then taking that kind of space, the found space, on the lower level, given where we situated the house, and making that some ancillary spaces that allow us to spread out a little bit. So what we have is this, in a sense, a building that is, in a sense, connecting in with the landscape. It's engaging. And what I like about that is, for me, or for my clients, whenever we are out there, you can't help but, not experience that landscape. You're constantly engaged with it. And for me, that's my Zen moments, being able to get out there and do that, and hopefully for them as well. And being able to use a material palette that is very simple. Stone that kind of connects to the farms that are out there, the white stucco, and a mahogany siding that, in a sense, plays up on a sense of modern interpretation of the barn doors and plank siding that you see in the barns and farms that are kind of the vernacular of the countryside there. And have this thing float off the hillside in a way that bedroom, for us, the master bedroom, you're perched out there and you really take advantage of the sun. And the inside, to be minimalist, to let the color be us, to let the space afford movement around, that it can play well with 4 people, and it can play well with 40 people coming in. And then having those views that connect to the mountains beyond, no matter where you look. So if you're looking up, the clerestory captures the sky without the landscape, and it provides that color on the wall. And if you're looking out at eye level, then you connect with the changing seasons. And you do so in a way that you can't miss it. And that the building itself opens itself up to the west in a way that, the landscape around it is raw, but it does it in a way that it literally is a level of transparency. Back to that cube project, Brian, that was my inspiration, of solid and void playing together. And being able to affect a delicate touch and not go too far. In our case, this is a budget, so how do you do this in a way that you respect your budget and you edit, which is another thing that in the designer's toolbox is a tool that's not often pulled out enough, editing our ideas down to the minimal expression. So I leave you with my happy clients. They all don't hug like this in all projects, but in this particular case, they certainly did it, and it's something that we enjoy every day. And as a quick recap, always think about your audience. So for the project that we're working on, we were fortunate enough to meet our audience, to meet our client, Big Rental Studios, and hear from them about their vision and where they want to go and how we can help take them there. And to think about the day in the life in the space or place that you're creating. So what does it mean to be in that space? And for all of us in this particular project, what will it mean for them to work in that space? 7 in the morning, like our clients showed us, or 5, I think they started. They started their day when it was really limited. And for every opportunity to make your colleagues and clients part of that journey. That it's a richer journey by virtue of the collaboration and the sum total of all of us rather than just one of us. So thank you very much.